My name is Mari Kuennen. I run the Minnesota Veterinary History Museum, and I'm here with Terri. Terri, why don't you start with giving us your full name?
My name is Terri Rinke. That's my married name. When I went to vet school, I was Terri Magnuson.
And do you consent to being interviewed today?
I do.
Perfect. We'll start with when and where you were born.
I was born actually in Sidney, Nebraska. My dad was in the Army, and so he was stationed at the base there. And I lived there for 2 months, and then we moved back to Minnesota where I grew up.
And who else was in your family?
I have an older sister, I have a younger brother, and I have a very much younger sister. So there's 4 of us siblings.
And where did you grow up in Minnesota?
I grew up in Cambridge, Minnesota. It's a small town about an hour north of the cities. Lived there most of my growing up years, except for the time that I was in Nebraska. And that's where I went to high school. And it's a nice town, about 3,000 people. It's grown a lot since I've left, but it was smaller when I was there.
And did you live on a home that did you have any pets or farm animals or?
We lived in town. My passion was horses, and so I got my first horse in 2nd or 3rd grade, and so we kept them at a place outside of town, and I would bike there before I got my driver's license. After I got my driver's license, that I would drive there, but horses were pretty much my passion. Later on, we got a dog when I was growing up, probably in maybe 8th grade, kind of middle school. So we didn't have a lot of pets, but generally the horses were kind of what drove me.
And that was the horses kind of what inspired you to start thinking about veterinary medicine, or what
It
first?
was. My dad is a human physician, and so I was interested in medicine, but I didn't think I could. The probability of having your patients die on you and being a human was, I think it was going to be too great, so I didn't want to explore that too much. I went to the library, this would have been my junior year, and I got a book on veterinary medicine, and then it's like, oh, this is what I want to do. And so it was a little bit later. Some people, I think, decide very early, but I was in high school, and I read this book, and so then that was my pursuit. From then on, I did everything that I could to gain entrance into veterinary school.
And what did that pursuit kind of look like? What kind of experiences or education?
So I went to a private school that did not have any animal programs, and so I basically just did a chemistry degree. And I tried to get a job with a veterinarian before, but I was not able to get one until my senior year of high school, or senior year of college. And so then that's where I got my experience with the veterinarian that was near the college. And he was able then to write me the recommendation that I needed to get in. I'm one of those people that it took 3 times to get into vet school. And so, but by the 3rd time I had my application, he was able to write the recommendation. And then I also had done some other experience at the University of Minnesota, the Lab Animal Research Center. I worked there, and they were able to write me a letter of recommendation. And so then I had a stronger ability to get in.
And what was the name of the veterinarian that you worked with?
I'm probably not going to remember his name. So it was at Roseville Animal Hospital. I'm sorry, it has escaped me now. It's a long time ago.
And what was some of the work that you did with them?
So I was a kennel person. I took care of the kennels at the end of the day, cleaning dog kennels, because he also had a boarding facility. And so then I worked on the weekends also, and then you're kind of their vet assistant, as well as being the answering the phone receptionist and cleaning kennels. So you kind of juggled all those things on the weekend.
So you finally get into vet school. What was that experience? Did you get something in the mail or?
I finally got my letter that I was accepted in the spring, and it was like, oh, I couldn't believe it because, you know, I had tried 3 times to get in, and then the 3rd time I was accepted, and so it was a good feeling. So then I had to arrange living quarters, you know, and that type of thing. But it was a very exciting new phase of starting a new pathway.
So you get into veterinary school, you get into your first year. What were the courses like for you? Were they easy? Were they kind of challenging?
The courses, since I'd been a chemistry major, the courses were not as hard as some of my chemistry classes that I took in college. However, the difficulty was the volume of material that you had to cover in a short amount of time. So you had to dedicate yourself to studying, you know, every night, because we had classes pretty much from 8 to 4, 8 to 5 every day. And then you had a lunch hour, and then you had, you know, if you took a break for supper, you know, you're kind of looking at studying from 6 to 10 or 11 or midnight. And if you skipped one of those nights, then you got that much further behind. So it was just the volume of material was more challenging than the coursework. And I was somebody that wanted to learn everything. So unfortunately, I probably tried to memorize everything, and then I missed some of the big points because I was trying to memorize all the little picky points.
So, you know, with that volume of coursework and all that studying and things you had to do, were there any peers or mentors that you had during that time that were an inspiration for you?
My classmates that I went through with, we somehow you kind of click with certain people, and so I hung around with them, and we would study together and we would eat together. We were a sort of a singles group because none of us were married, and we had ability to hang out together. And so if we all had free time, we would go to a movie together. If we would go to each other's houses and just eat together or what have you. But the peers were what I think helped me get through and, you know, helped me study and that type of thing.
Who were some of the people in that group?
So my friends were my namesake. There was another Magnuson, so it was Kathy Magnuson. We spell our names differently, but she has 2 S's and I have 1 S. But we were alphabetically close together. And then Tanya Dinas, now she's Prickett, and so we became the 3 of us. And then Marv Johnson was the other one that was in our kind of group, and so we would do a lot of things together.
And were you working or doing anything along those lines? Were you still with the research group, or?
I had left the research lab because I didn't want to have work hinder my ability to do schoolwork, but then I decided I did have some more time to work, and so I picked up odd jobs here and there. A roommate in my sophomore year was doing work with a research dog colony, and she helped me. She needed help, you know, and so I did that for a few months. Helping her with and I was just basically taking care of the dogs, you know, just feeding and watering, that type of thing. And then there was a research project that was done on E. coli in cattle, and so they were doing a calf study down at Rosemont, and so it was all hours, and so they needed these odd hours covered, and so we would sign up for these odd time hours and drive to Rosemont and sit in the trailer, and then we had to do checks every hour. So that was interesting, and you learn a lot. And then I'm trying to think what else I did do some work for one of the professors in virology and he kind of taught me some things. You know, so I had scattered different things that I did during the 4 years.
And so you had quite a bit of experiences both with large animal and small animal in the research side. What were you thinking of going into after you graduated?
So what my goal was is that I thought I did not want to stay in the cities. I wanted to live out in the country because I grew up in a small town, or at least in a small town. And I thought, well, the perfect practice would be if I could do about a third dairy or large animal, a third horses, and a third small animal. That was in my mind, that was going to be the ideal working situation. But I came close to it, but I have a but there, because when I went to actually interview for jobs, it was very difficult to find a job. Our class, we had about 30% women, but women in large animal medicine was still a very new thing, and we weren't well received or accepted in the rural community. And so a lot of the jobs that I interviewed for, they would never call me back, or I didn't get any response. And I found a job listing, and I called him, and he didn't call me back, but my dad encouraged me to call him again. And so I called a second time, and this is before cell phones and internet and all that kind of thing, so you depended on the landline. And he actually set up a time that I could come and kind of do a job interview. And that was the place that I ended up working at, because he was the first one that offered me a job.
And what was the name of that practice?
It was Pierce Veterinary Clinic, it was in Wisconsin. So I was I had grown up in Minnesota, but fortunately after school I thought there was maybe a chance I might end up in Wisconsin. And so I had taken testing in Wisconsin so that I could do both states. And that was a good thing, because we graduated in June and I did not get a job until August. So it took a while to find a job, not like it is now where you have a lot of choices.
And what did that first year or those first couple years look like for you?
It was challenging because I had not grown up on a dairy farm, so the practice was a lot dairy. And so I had to learn what I was supposed to be doing out on calls, but my boss was pretty good to me and stuck with me, and because there is a learning curve, and so it went better as time went on. But there were frustrating cases of there was a calving that I was supposed to do, and I tried to do it, and I couldn't get it. And so I actually went to his house, and he was kind enough to come out and help me with it. And then he was trying, and he put chains on the front legs, and then he put chains on the back leg, and it turned out to be one of these schistosomus reflexus, which is a very challenging. We ended up doing a C-section on the cow in order to get the calf out, which of course was dead. But it's just situations like that you have one of those cases every 10 years, and so they're challenging. And then the other thing that you have to learn when you're out in practice is where everybody's located. And so I was lucky that the practice was in one county, so I only had to have one plat book. But you learn all the names of the roads and where the farms are located. I mean, that's a learning curve, so that you don't have to look at the map every time you're going to a certain place. The other learning curve is where the lights are, the electricity in the barns, because all the barns are different. There are some that are very old, some are more new, and where would the light switches be? And then the other thing you have to learn, if the cow is left in and the trainers were on, you have to learn how do you turn those off. And so a lot of times I'd go in and I'd have to follow the electrical wires, to try and figure out where the switches were to get things off. So that was something that they don't teach you, you know, and you have to just learn as you go. So there's learning ability. The other thing I would say, when you go from the high ivory tower situation where you have all this help and people around you, and you're out then in this rural situation, my help were two 60-year-old ladies. And, you know, how can you have them restrain the dog or do anything? And so you kind of have to adjust the way that you practice. You can't practice the way that you were taught to practice. I mean, you'd like to, but it's just really impossible to do it that way. And so you have to sort of refigure things. And so that again was a learning curve. And then I'm trying to do things the way the practitioner, the owner, was doing things, because I'm not going to come in and change everything. It's his practice and he hired me, and so you have to try and fit in to the way he's doing things as best you can.
And what was the name of the owner of that practice?
That was Dr. Trainer, and he has since passed on, but he was a good mentor in some respects. Maybe particularly in probably large animal. In small animal, there were things that I could have learned that, you know, he didn't have the ability to do, and so that was probably lacking. But so he helped me out get that first job, and so then I worked there for 5 years. And then, we had decided we wanted to have a family because I'd gotten married, and we had my first daughter was born, and so then I was going to take some time off. And I'd given him enough leeway time so that he hired a replacement vet, so that was not an issue. And I ended up taking almost 8 months off. Just to, you know, enjoy her and just try and figure out the mom thing. And then it got to be time to go back to work, and it wasn't going to work out where I could go back to work at that practice. And so then I ended up working at a classmate of mine who was kind of in the area, a little bit north, and he was pretty much a large animal vet, but he said I could do whatever small animal patients came, and so I did that. And plus he needed help really badly, so he didn't care how many hours I worked, so I could just kind of ease back into it. I started out at 3 days a week, and then I kind of worked up to 4 days a week, and I worked there for almost 2 years, and then it was time to have another child. And so then I had to stop, because it was mostly large animal. I had to stop that, but meanwhile, I had come home. Some of the clients were about almost an hour away. So I had gone out to do a calving, and so you drive for an hour and you do the calving, and then, which takes about an hour, and by the time you get all cleaned up and everything, and then you drive home. So it's like 3 hours, and I got home at 2 in the morning, and I said, you know, this isn't really what I want to do, because the clients are too far away. And so that started our thought process, my husband and my thought process, that we would start our own clinic. And so we actually built our own clinic on the farm and that we had bought, and started it from scratch. And that was the start of my, you know, sort of working for myself. So had the second daughter, and then she was born on December 30th, and then I pretty much was kind of open for business in January. And so I did not take off as much time as I had for the first one. And then but it was, I mean, I didn't do a lot of things. I needed help. So my husband was working his job, and so he would work during the day, and we'd have people, dog spays or cat spays or whatever, that needed to have surgery. They could bring them at the end of the day, and I would do them at night. and then they could pick them up the next day, which the clients loved it because they didn't have to take off any time from work. And but we could only do that for so long. So then my husband quit his job, it's in January, in May, and so then we're on our own. It's like, we got to make this work because we have to cover health insurance. And that was the biggest expense that I had that I wasn't really prepared for, is that we had to pay for our own health insurance. And so we started doing that, but we made it work. And so it was just he and I, and we did it for 30-some years. And I just recently retired, so.
What year did you start your own practice, and where?
1990, so it was on our farm, and so we were still in Pierce County in Wisconsin, and so it was 1990 that we opened, and then I had one more daughter in 94, and I think with her I only took off 2 weeks. And then I kind of just started working again. So the time off with each kid got progressively less. But.
And what was working while you were pregnant like?
Well, it was challenging, especially the last one, because by then I had my own set of clients, you know, and I was supposed to go out and do things. And the one dairy client that I had that particular year, he wasn't a real big dairy. He had like 40 or 45 cows, but he had like 5 DAs. And by the time the 5th one came around, I was, let's see, she was born in April. I think I was probably like 7 or 8 months pregnant. And I couldn't bend over to shave the underneath side of the cow. And so I handed him the clipper, and he didn't even know I was pregnant. And he was a little upset with me. He said, you know, he's paying for this service, and why couldn't I, you know, clip the cow down below? And but it was all fine, because later on he figured out I was pregnant. He apologized. That he says, well, no wonder you couldn't bend over and do. But so it was challenging, because you have this bulge and you can't, you know, you're trying to move and you can't get, and you're worried about getting kicked, and but so it was challenging, but I made it through safely. So.
And so this entire time you're doing both large and small animal?
I was. So from when we opened in 90 until what happened, then I didn't have that many dairy clients, but they eventually sold out. So I did the dairies for about 25 years. And then they sold out. So then I was still doing some equine work and some pig health certificates and some sheep and goat work. But what happened with me is that I ended up breaking my back in 2018, and I could not do large animal anymore. So then I had to, if people called, I had to stop, and I had to refer all my equine clients to somebody else, because I physically couldn't go out and do it anymore. And also then we had to more minimize even the small animal. I couldn't do big dogs anymore because I couldn't bend, and we couldn't lift them up on the surgery table. So we had to do weight restrictions on what I could do. So it's kind of been a downward lessening of work for the last 6 years.
And so you started, you know, and you get your husband involved. What was his background?
So he grew up in the city of Madison, but he didn't like the city at all. He has a animal science degree from Madison University, and he's very, very adaptable and knows a lot about animal behavior and that type of thing. But he's not a registered technician or licensed technician or that type of thing. But he did everything that I didn't do. I mean, he didn't do surgery, but he answered the phone. He was my receptionist. He was my handler, so he was my technician helping. He was my janitor, and then he was also the caregiver because we had 3 girls, and he did the laundry and the cooking and the cleaning for the 3 kids so that I could work and be a vet. So we did it, and it worked for us because we like each other, and we can spend time together because we eat together, we work together, and we're spending 24 hours a day together. And I know it doesn't work for everybody, but in our case it did work.
How did you meet him?
I met him when I was in vet school. He was working in a lab, and so it just happened. Got interested.
Did anyone else get involved in your team or in your clinic over the years?
In our Beldenville Vet Service, no, it's only just ever been the 2 of us. I did have, I've had a couple kids that I have mentored for, various times. One was short, one was a little bit longer, but otherwise there's been no other paid positions. So it's just been the 2 of us that have kind of done everything.
Do you have any memorable cases throughout the years that you tend to share with family or friends, or something that sticks out to you as something particularly shocking or exciting, or anything along, or just memorable?
So the things that I'm always amazed at how things get stuck in dogs' mouths, and whether it's bones or sticks or plastic things or what have you, they can get wedged in all kinds of different ways. I've had the little ring bones get wedged behind the canine teeth in the lower jaw, and you need to take a hacksaw, and saw it off. Then the rib bones can get stuck in the upper palate and be wedged up there. And I've had plastic things that have gotten wedged somewhere in their teeth, and so it's always amazing to me how they can eat something and it gets stuck. And then of course the other thing is fish hooks with cats. They play with the fishing rod, and then the lure gets stuck in their teeth or their mouth, and it can be pretty traumatic, because they're quite anxious because it hurts, and they don't want anybody to touch them, and there's blood everywhere, and so it's pretty much an emergency. You need to get them in, and you can't do a thing until you sedate them. So those are the ones that come to mind that were interesting mouth things.
And so, having this practice 30 plus years, I'm sure you noticed quite a lot of changes in the way that veterinary medicine, the ways practice were operated, the field in general, how that changed?
Yes, it's changed a lot, and unfortunately I could not always keep up with the technology because, as I've told several people, I was worried about the electricity going out. And we did not have I just recently got Wi-Fi in June of 2023. So I had to do everything, paper and document things that way. And I had a lantern that I bought, and my kids teased me about it. And I said, well, at least then I can still, do the exam on the dog. If the lights are out or the electricity isn't working, I can take the lantern in and I can still give it a shot and go forward. My scale doesn't work because that's electric. But what happened was that the squirrels would jump around in the trees across the street, and they would fry the transformer, and that happened once a year, pretty regularly. And it's kind of funny. There's blue sky, no wind, no, and we're the only ones that lost our electricity.
And that happened a few different times. Did that ever actually happen during an exam or an appointment?
Oh, yeah, it would happen, and then I would say, oh, I'm sorry, my power went out. Sometimes I would just do the appointment in the hallway because there was some daylight coming in. Sometimes it happened and I had surgery, and fortunately I had already clipped the animal so that, the shaver worked, and then I just had used the light from the window. I didn't have my other light to use, but it happened enough that I was worried or concerned about electricity going out, so I didn't ever even think about Wi-Fi or that type of thing. We didn't have it. It wasn't available.
And what about some of the kind of more the changes of rural, access and the large animal aspect of your practice?
So yeah, the large animals has changed a lot, and of course I had to stop doing that just for physical reasons. So I haven't been able to keep up with that as well. But yeah, that changed a lot with, what you couldn't do, and going out and trying to, do herd checks. But it was a nice aspect of the monthly herd checks and the way that we used to do them. You saw the client owner farmer more than you would see your small animal patients, because you went out there on a monthly basis and you'd really get to know them, and you would talk, or at least the one that I'm thinking of, we would talk about everything. You talk about political things, you talk about family things, you talk about religion, you talk about everything that's not correct to talk about, we would talk about. And that's the part that I probably missed, was just being able to converse with somebody. You get to know them really well and find out how their family is doing and what's new and this and that. And I saw him, so I quit in 2014, and I saw him like 10 years later. And he said he also, that was one aspect that he missed. He had sold his herd and he moved, and but he said the talks that we had were really significant for him, and so he said that was one aspect that he really missed as well. So that it was nice.
And so, coming up towards today, you're kind of more recently retired, right?
Yep.
Did you experience some of the changes that had to happen for operation, things like that, during COVID?
Yes, at COVID, what it did was I had to space things out. I couldn't do as many appointments because I had to clean up, after each person. And so I spaced people out, and then I would have people come in and pick. So I was giving times for everything. You could come and pick up this medication, but I gave them specific pickup times, where I hadn't before. I would say, I'm here from 8 to 5, you can just come whenever. But I had to give much more specific times to do that during COVID. And in some ways it was easier because then I had a time, that I knew when people were coming. I could not close, or I always had people bring the pets in because I was not able to bring in the dog or the cat and handle it myself. And so I always had owners come in with their pets, and they seemed to appreciate that. They reported to me that they did not like going to other clinics where they couldn't be in with their pet. That's very traumatic to pets, and being separated, and the owners did not like it either. So I just kind of kept doing things the way I had, just that I had more specific times. And so that lasted, 2 to 3 years. And then, but it's wearing, and I was kind of slowing down and doing fewer and fewer things. And then it just got to a point where I was going to give them a year's notice. And so a year ago I started telling people, this is my last year, so.
And alongside that, in the past, 5, 10 years, things like specialties and things like that have really grown. what was kind of your experience with kind of maybe having to refer people to different places, or those kind of new, you mentioned the electrical, of those kind of
Right.
specialty equipment requirements or expectations from clients?
It was challenging. I didn't have a lot of clients that wanted to refer. They wanted me to do everything that I could to help the pet, and so I did what I could. But we came up to a real quick point where I can't do anything more, and so they had to make decisions probably sooner. Do you want to refer it at this point in time, or are we just doing palliative care, or where are we going with this? And so there are a lot of specialties, but I did not have a lot of clientele that wanted to utilize all the specialties, except for emergency medicine. They would get referred because it's an emergency and it's life or death, and so then they would go.
So reflecting along this long career, what are some of the moments that you are most proud of?
I think being able to do a practice, large and small animal, and work at it for 30 some years, and just being a vet for 42 years, and then being also able to have a family and juggle the two things together, because it is a balancing act. And how can you make this work? And it did work out in how we did it. I know it wouldn't work for a lot of people, but the way that we did it was good. And so I think we raised our 3 girls, and so we're happy with that. And we did what we could with the veterinary community, trying to help people and their pets.
And what are some of the challenges that you're seeing in veterinary medicine today, or some of the issues that you think are front of mind?
So I think, today everybody is, it must be harder to communicate. We have all these communications abilities, but I think we don't do very much face-to-face talking. Everybody's texting or sending emails. And I think we've fallen by the wayside as far as verbally talking with each other. So I think that's something that maybe needs to be looked at. And I think there's a lot of stress involved in working, and it doesn't even have to be veterinary medicine. There's just a lot of stress if you have family or work or other obligations, and trying to decrease the stress level of everyone would be beneficial.
And looking back on it now, and the things happening today, and all the accomplishments that you've made, what is some of the advice or hopes that you have for the next generation of vets?
So I think if you're able to follow your passions, because when you're doing something that you're passionate about, it is not so burdensome, and don't be afraid to try new things, because it might be something that you end up really liking. And don't be afraid of failing or doing something wrong, because everybody fails and everybody does things wrong, and it's how you pick yourself up and keep going that is the important thing. So if you can find something, figure out in your own life what you're passionate about, and then pursue that as best you can.
Well, thank you so much, Terri, for your time. And with that, we'll conclude the interview.
All right.